Hello, everyone. I'm CJ Saretto, and this is our inaugural episode of the Axiom Legal Tech podcast. Today, I'm joined by a great cast of characters. We have Peter Duffy from Titans Legal, Alex Fortescue-Webb from Legora, Chris Frickland from Axiom, and I'm CJ Saretto. I'm Axiom's Chief Technology Officer. And today, we're going to be having a little group conversation to talk about piloting legal technology, piloting generative AI legal technology, what you should expect to get out of pilots, how you pick the right tools, what kind of outcomes and efficiency gains you might expect to achieve. Should be a pretty great conversation. And I'm going to just start by asking Chris and Peter to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what we've done at Axiom in terms of piloting legal technology.
Yeah. So I'm Chris Frickland, Director of AI at Axiom. Was thrilled to be able to have Peter join us to run a couple pilots at Axiom, leading us through use case selection, the actual structure of the pilot, how we got feedback, how we provided support, and all the way through our multi-week pilot process. Peter, I just want to kind of open with, we did a lot of planning and development around what use cases we were going to do at Axiom, why they were important to us. So can you kind of walk me through the steps that we took around kind of that early development of how we would approach which technology, given the incredibly crowded generative AI legal tech field?
Sure, absolutely. So when assessing what particular use cases make most sense for Axiom, at a high level, view it through three different lenses. So the first one is from a user desirability point of view. So I'm looking at the terms of from the attorneys. What is their day-to-day? What are the biggest pain points that they face? How frequently are they facing these pain points? And what is the value of actually kind of solving them for them? The second one is focused on the commercial viability. So being realistic from how Axiom delivers legal services. Where do you see the largest volume of work that you delivered for clients? In your case, we saw very clearly that commercial contracts account for a large bulk of the work, so it made sense to focus really on the value that could be delivered there. And the third angle is from a technical feasibility. So realistically, what is the technology capable of now? What are the particular areas and pain points that's most suitable to solve? And what is the realistic complexity of introducing that technology? With the additional slant on top of, okay, what makes sense to tackle first? How can we get some quick wins? How can we really kind of road test this technology that has a lot of hype for sure in the market and really assess where it's at right now to get hands-on? And from that point of view, it made sense to be focused on the pre-execution document review.
Excellent. And the first tool that we ended up going out to talk with or talk and assess in the market was redlining specifically. And do you remember the selection criteria we had for that tool? What were the most important aspects that we were looking at as it fit into the Axiom use case?
Firstly, it's worth calling out technology adoption often faces hurdles when it comes to just getting into the hands of users and getting using it regularly. And we were super mindful. This type of pre-execution activity, that is a Microsoft Word activity. So we knew for sure that the technology we're going to select had to be live within that environment of the attorneys. So in our case, having a Microsoft Word add-in was critical. In addition to that, we know from broad experience that a lot of people may not have existing playbooks. So that ability to very rapidly create playbooks that could be applied was critical. That fundamentally, if you don't have a rule set that you're applying to do the commercial document review, then that's a non-starter. And then the third one is just overall ease of use. So having a super slick user experience that reduces any potential hurdles or challenges for the attorneys when actually using the product. They were some of the critical features we looked at a high level. Of course, our feature set was quite in depth across many different areas, but if I call out just three, would be three.
And I think kind of looking at it from the Axiom lens, that playbooking feature and what we've seen as we've deployed it out to our clients of the ability to kind of our model is drop attorneys into different client sites, have them immediately prove value, and having that quick ability to build playbooks and immediately have the Axiom attorney start to demonstrate value of a tool has been, I think, invaluable as we've been deploying it out. Also, as our clients have come to us and said, we're interested in AI, but we also don't have a playbook. And being able to help collaborate with them, we know how to do that. That's something we've been doing with our clients for quite a long time. And then take that knowledge of after we got out of the pilot and we started deploying it, we not only can create a playbook for you, we can then use a generative AI tool like DraftPilot to run that playbook and very quickly get up to speed. Going back though to that pilot phase, I know that sometimes we've seen a struggle with adoption or workflow integration. We selected based really on that Microsoft Word and staying within that workflow. But as you've seen other pilots run, and as we've kind of left the pilot phase at Axiom, what's your view on how long these pilots should run and what you're seeing in the market and how long it takes to get really that value?
Yeah, sure. What I typically advise is around 2 to 3 months should be sufficient time to get a really good grip of both the technology and the user's overall kind of feeling towards that technology. So it takes time initially for people to have their sufficient training to get a few reps in and how to actually use it in their day-to-day. But by the end of 2 or 3 months, there should be a mixture of having sufficient data that has been collected from the product analytics, from doing user interviews, from doing the surveys, to really get the data that can inform the decisions about whether it's meeting the assumptions going into it. And very importantly as well, it's sufficient time to see how you work and partner with a selected vendor, because that is absolutely critical. It's not just a technology decision. It's a team that is there to support you on the vendor side, and seeing them in real world scenarios of how they are reacting to feedback that's coming through, how quickly they are adjusting to any thoughts from users. So that period, it keeps people focused as well. It's not going from a 6-month pilot or a year-long pilot where things can potentially start to fizzle out if we're trying to guess just to make a decision. Let's be super focused going into it. We can have a clear set of assumptions that you are testing and being very clear that we have a condensed period to assess these assumptions. So that's the period overall I suggest going with, and it helps to build momentum afterwards as well. That there's this idea of let's move at pace, let's get the information and data that we need before we ideally move on to a scaled version of this product.
And I saw that quite a bit with the kind of the level of support that you were giving in our pilots was kind of on the weekly basis. It was office hours, typically involving someone from the product management organization of these vendors. It was regular conversations, and we did a highly metric pilot over 8 weeks for all of our generative AI pilots, where we did a midpoint survey. I think you talked to everybody for 20 minutes at that midpoint, and then also an endpoint survey.
Yeah.
Talked to them for another 20 minutes at the end, and really kind of got the shape of success. And I think we've seen successful and I would say less successful pilots at Axiom. And I think that really revolved around use case and working repetition or reps in with the technology. What are kind of those common reasons that you've seen maybe outside of Axiom's pilots for failures, or kind of where you've seen a pilot start and it didn't necessarily achieve the goal of arriving at a decision?
Yeah, sure. One of the obvious things that comes to mind is often when people run a pilot, they treat it as a side of desk activity using dummy or synthetic data rather than actually involving it in people's day-to-day. So lawyers are supremely time-poor people. Asking them to do any additional work on top of their day-to-day is just really hard ask. Whereas if you are hopefully introducing a technology which is driving efficiency and improving quality, that can only really be done if it's on their work product. If you're asking them, if you're saying, we're going to bring in this time efficiency tool, but by the way, you're not going to save any time during the pilot because we're going to ask you to do this additional work on top of it. This idea of using dummy or synthetic data, I think it makes it far, far harder to get actual engagement and real value, real valuable feedback from people and how they would use it in their day-to-day. So that's a very obvious one. A second one is lack of support for the people involved in the pilot, that you have to be on hand. It's a hand-holding exercise. Right from the start, people will face challenges. You'll have a different maturity level when it comes to technology adoption across your cohort. And you have to be able to spot those people who are facing a little bit more challenges really early and get in there right from the start to support them and help them on that journey. Otherwise, if you don't get that early, they start to lose interest very quickly, or they're not seeing the value. You want to get to that value delivery, that wow moment, as soon as you can. And once you get there, once you have that, it's so much easier to keep engagement throughout. Whereas if you start slowly and if they're not fully supported and if they run into a problem that hasn't been solved, it's so much harder to win them back. And ultimately, trust is a critical part of it. As lawyers are time poor, they're skeptical by default. So you need to be respectful of that and make sure that there's suitable support right from the start of delivery.
I think I've had quite a few client conversations in the last 3 months, especially around deploying generative AI tools. And I think one of the common complaints that I've heard from our clients actually has been when they're assessing these tools and they're given only kind of 10 to 14 days to assess it. I think what we've seen has been it takes 10 to 14 days for lawyers to get comfortable with something, they get the idea of something new in their workflow, and then it takes another 3 to 6 weeks for them to build a new habit. And where we've seen success is highly specific use case, repetition over and over. The more generalized the use case got, you only got 1 or 2 reps a week on each of these use cases, the less likely that lawyer was to adopt it. And then I go and speak to our clients, and one of the things that's very obvious to them is, I think a common refrain has been, I don't want to get married after only 2 weeks. And they're just kind of struggling with how to understand the impact that these tools can bring to their organizations in such a short time.
Chris, you're asking that question because of the traditional trial windows that many of these SaaS providers provide, right?
Yes.
And Alex, like you're sort of like newly on the SaaS provider side, right? Like that, like you just came from a large firm. How do you feel about trial windows? Yeah, well, it's super interesting actually listening to the discussion, because I think there's a trade-off, there's a sweet spot in the middle, right? Too short a trial window makes it very difficult to assess. People don't have time to get up to speed. They don't feel like they've tested it properly. And it's hard then to make a high sort of conviction decision. At the same time, though, I've already seen some clients ask for extremely long trial periods. And that also isn't the most productive, right? Because then you get a lack of focus, you get a lack of urgency. A lot of people are like, oh, I've got 3 more months. I don't need to do this now. I'll do this next week. And next week kind of never comes. So there is definitely a balance between those two. I think it varies a little bit firm to firm, level of internal support, obviously level of vendor support, but yeah, I see the trade-off there as well.
I want to ask you 2 completely different questions at the same time. I don't know which one to ask first. The first question I have is, if you found yourself where a client had brought on an implementation specialist, like somebody like Peter, and they're saying, hey, we want to run a 3-month pilot and it's going to be super structured. How do you feel about that? Like, do you feel like that's going to give you a better chance of winning the account or a worse chance? And then maybe the second question is, how often at the firm did you find yourself trying new technology and after a trial you decided it's not right? And how long did it take you to figure it out? Was it like a whole year commitment? Was it something you figured out in a couple of weeks or a couple of months of trialing? You can answer that any way you want. I realize I threw 2 competing questions at you simultaneously.
Yeah, so on the first question, I would say it's generally, and maybe putting to one side whether it's good for us or good for others, but if it's good for the client, right? Like if the client is going to maximize their chance of making the right decision for them, I think a structured pilot is absolutely necessary, right? So the worst case scenario for us and frankly for the client is a long, unstructured pilot, because then we're trying to add structure that's not necessarily being accepted, or it feels awkward. But at the same time, the client's probably getting frustrated because they're not actually getting the insights that they want to get. They're not linking it to specific use cases. They're not able to, at the end, give any kind of real articulation of value or lack of value. So it ends up being a somewhat frustrating process for everyone. So I think structure is super important. And then the actual period is a little bit organization dependent. So we see some organizations having really good justification for a multi-month pilot. Others are very clear that they need the focus. They need it to be 2 to 4 weeks. So I think that varies a lot. And I've forgotten your second question already, CJ.
The second question is, when you're not on the vendor side, when you're on the purchaser side, how long does it take you to figure out if you've made a good decision?
A good decision once you've actually bought it, or even during the pilot?
Well, I guess it depends on if you had to buy it in order to get the amount of time you needed. So answer it however you want.
My experience is that it's generally, you generally get, in a test environment, you generally get a very strong impression relatively quickly. So you pretty quickly know, you get a feel for the tool, you understand what it is. The next part, though, is a little bit of what Peter was talking about, which is actually using it in a live environment. And that's not always possible. Like, it actually is possible with Gen AI tools, because usually you can fit this into a workflow very quickly. But if you think about, data room providers or something like that, where actually
you're probably not going to use it on a live transaction just because of what's at stake during a trial period. But actually, it's only when you do that, but you really understand some of the nitty gritty, some of the things that don't work so well. So in those cases, it's more about how quickly you can get users actually using it, in a real live situation, and how quickly you can actually get insights out of that, I would say. So a little bit of an answer about how it depends, but some insight as well.
I would jump in on that and say where we've seen, when we've gone to clients and we're talking about ways that we can work with them and we can bring Legora in to create, efficiencies or other things like that. One thing that we've actually done quite often is you're right, they're not willing to do it on a live deal, but a lot of our clients have a deal they just completed. And they're like, well, these are no longer highly confidential. Like the deal risk is minimal, if any at all. And we've actually gone in and said, okay, like our demo, our POC with you is actually completing some part of that deal flow.
But now using AI?
But using Legora and comparing it against with their non-AI provider. And seeing, for them to be able to see like, oh, like I already know this work product. I already know the result here. And us being able to come in and say, like, here's how Axiom can deliver it with Legora. And here's the work product that would exist.
These are the most fun demos when you get given real documents where the work product has been predefined because it's it's an existing deal, it's a previous deal, and live you're throwing those into the platform and seeing whether the output aligns. I mean, that's that's kind of a last success for a demo, I think. Super fun, a little bit nerve-wracking.
And two things come to mind on the pilot as well. So I think people have different understandings or framings of a pilot. The way I view it is that like you should have done a lot of upfront technology due diligence to understand going into that pilot from your technology specialist. And it should be the pilot going in with the high conviction. We think that this is very likely that this is a product that is suitable for us, rather than going in and be like, oh, we don't know much about it and we're just going to kind of learn as we go. And the second thing is a lot depends on what happens post-pilot too. So within the pilot, ideally, you're confirming that yes, these are the people we want to work with. This technology is great. That doesn't mean you go from pilot number of users to enterprise-wide overnight. It's just confirming, yes, we believe that this is a good team, this is a good product, and we'll scale at a pace that makes sense for us. We're just confirming that we want to make a long-term commitment rather than, yes, we want to, and now everything.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. It's obviously a big challenge with generative AI because it's such a step up in technological capability, is that sort of implementation and adoption and gradually building it into every single workflow. It's different to, certainly in legal tech, some of the historical tools which were very narrowly focused, and it's really only one workflow that you're looking at. But this is a totally different challenge. So it makes a lot of sense to graduate that rollout, I think.
And I think definitely we see I think I've said this a couple of times, but the use case specificity is really helpful in, I think, tool identification, also pilot usage and rolling out is, even if a tool can do 17 things, if you give that tool to a room of lawyers and it can do 17 things, each one's not going to get to use all 17 capabilities. But if you say, here's a tool that can do 17 things, but we're going to focus the next 4 weeks on this one thing. And like, let's really understand how this applies to our workflow. And then if we like it, okay, great. We can adopt it just on that basis alone. Now let's look at the next thing and grow kind of that adoption curve with capability. And I think that builds the repetitions of the use case, but it also builds trust in the tool as you go into the next kind of capability.
Exactly. It's a case of rather than trying to solve every problem at once, being very clearly aligned. Okay, we know this is a problem that you face. Look, try it in this scenario and you can see the value you can get from this thing. Now let's move on to other things. So with any technology introduction, you're solving specific problems. Technology is an enabler for people doing their jobs, and you want to really align everything that's happening in, okay, given the nuances of the problems you face in your day-to-day, here's something that can help with these individual problems.
It sounds easy, and I'm not so sure how actually easy it is, right? We've come from a world where the legal tech solved a very specific problem, like, oh, I know I need a contract management system. I know I need a net documents, a document retention system for my firm. I know roughly what that class of product does. I'm not maybe happy with my old product or it's time to renew, I'm going to go do a market assessment. I'm going to pick another tool that's just a shiny new version of the same thing, right? Like I had a minivan, it's old, I'm buying a new minivan. But if we look at what we did, right, Peter, when we were starting Axiom's pilot process, we had done actually quite a lot of consulting directly with you for quite a few months ahead of time, just to understand, okay, what are these different Gen AI tools and what do they do? And what are the classes of them? And which problems did they solve that look like problems that we have? And unsurprisingly, Axiom does a lot of commercial contracts engagements. So it seemed obvious to us, yes, a lot of our attorneys are redlining on counterparty paper for clients scattered all over the globe every day, like really significant piece of population. These redlining tools look really exciting. Let's select something for redlining. And we run an RFP and we got a lot of the lawyers involved and we followed a very structured process. Many thanks to you for helping us figure out how to do that. And we down selected to a few products and then we down selected to one. But along the way, right, and I think everybody knows, like we picked Draft Pilot for redlining. That's the product that we picked. Along the way, we came into contact with Legora and with Harvey, and we saw their tabular review and vault features, and we thought, oh, that's cool. There's another thing of it. We need to run a different pilot that's just about this like bulk document review. And then we've sort of stumbled our way through more features, and now we're starting to think, oh, wow, we can plug these different Lego blocks in different ways. And now maybe we need to do another pilot that's just about giving a chat agent to a lawyer. So, it has felt not as structured as maybe we'd hoped for it to be. Like, it seems like this sea of generative AI technology is just, it keeps having these new capabilities. And it almost feels like we fumbled our way through it a little bit. And yet, thankfully, because we intended to have some structure, at least we've had some structure. So I just imagine it's hard for folks looking at this market, like to just know what is possible. You were mentioning the generative AI technology. It's exciting because it's new and its capabilities are evolving. Like, how do people figure out where to start? Like, what do they do first, Peter? Is it literally, are they supposed to start the way we did, where it's like, look at what people are doing and then just try for that? Are they supposed to do a market assessment? Are they supposed to throw a dart at a dartboard?
Yeah, well, sure. So they can try all those things, but in reality, like, people don't need to learn all the mistakes themselves, or they don't need to go through this process just alone. It's in the case of Axiom, when you wanted support with that, we worked together to get support to do this, given that I do this with many other organizations. It helps that effectively it is so complex at the moment with so many new vendors coming out and so much happening that to have a grip on the market is effectively a full-time job. And very few people are focused on doing that full time. So it is hard to just come at it and try and determine what is happening out there. I think that it's a useful step for people to talk to others who have done it, either peers or other specialists who can support them on that journey, rather than having someone side of this to try and understand, okay, who are these, whatever be 500 or 1,000 new vendors that have come on the market in the last year or two, to try and make sense of that. It's very hard to do it alone. So even as a simple guidance, it would be learn from the lessons of others who have been along that journey, whether it be others in a similar position within other law firms or within other corporate teams or other consultants, that there are people there to guide and support. That is a very useful first step when it comes to actually getting very specific on what real use case will you go after. Be really mindful of what matters. What from a business point of view, I say, if we come back to the example with Axiom, where from looking at the workload, where it's so much of the work being around the commercial contracts, it's such a win that can be had there. So people to look at their existing types of work that they do and the pain points that they face to identify suitable areas to start to go after.
Just to add, maybe some of what you were saying really resonated and is quite aligned with how we think about rollouts as well, which is you can't have a bottom-up and a top-down approach, right? So bottom-up,
you're identifying use cases, you're testing products against those use cases, or you're testing capabilities, you're identifying a value driven from them, possibly you're identifying how you can enhance them even further. But because legal work is sort of macro quite similar, every M&A transaction follows a vaguely similar structure. Every commercial contract review follows a vaguely similar structure. But actually, when you get into the detail, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of difference. We also find that there's quite a lot of sort of serendipity. Like once people have got into a few use cases, started to get an understanding of the parameters within which these tools work, they will often come up with sort of new or adjacent use cases themselves. And it's a little bit of this personal discovery. And so you get a little bit of that push and pull, where suddenly you're getting an organic expansion of various capabilities, which I think is not totally dissimilar to your experience sort of noticing that there was a tabular review next to the word add-in or.
Well, that's exactly right, Alex. In fact, like Chris and I have had this like ongoing debate about how much training we need to give people versus how much they just need to sort of experiment with it and figure it out for itself. Like, you want to share some of your thoughts on that, Chris?
What we've found, or what I've seen with the lawyers, so I'm working with them day in, day out, from the people that are struggling to adopt generative AI and understand it to the people that have, taken it from day one. Peter, you know who I'm talking about, and you're looking at like, I don't think that's how you use that product, but here you're using it to be more effective. And I don't know, in a sense, but I think that the level of support and training and how quickly people take to it really helps drive finding those additional use cases. I've also talked with our clients that have tried to roll out, kind of top-down directive. We bought this tool, everybody use it. And these are large multinational organizations, and they're like, no one's adopted it. No one's using it. And to other organizations, similarly large multinationals, that are saying, no, we actually have an entire enablement team that their whole job is to go around and see who's using what and develop the prompt libraries with these users and kind of really try to move the needle. And that's one thing that we actually have at Axiom as well, is ensuring that we're wrapping that support around our lawyers as we develop these capabilities and as we deploy these tools. We don't want our lawyers to be going into a client site not knowing how to use it, not knowing how to be, or not trained on it. They should at least have a good starting point and then a resource to come to when they run into challenges. Pitching it out to you, Peter, how do you approach training, especially given all of these use cases that you could see, and knowing that adoption is better the more trained you are, the more support? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so training is absolutely critical. That fundamentally, Gen AI performs very differently to what people understand of computers. We know computers, it's reliable, deterministic, create calculations, all that good stuff. Gen AI is not that. It is not a deterministic, same output every single time. It is not great at calculations, but it is creative and it understands natural language, which we don't understand, which is not typical with computers that we know of. So it's a fundamental shift in how we interact with computers. And that's not obvious to people. And when people start using tools, if they haven't had a suitable level of training, then it can very quickly, they can hit a wall, not understanding, okay, the nuances of the product, or this AI comes back with this answer and it's not correct, there's hallucinations. It can cause confusion and people can lose trust. And fundamentally, with lawyers, being a skeptical bunch, if they lose trust, it's hard to get that back. So having sufficient training is absolutely critical, both in terms of the usage of the tool itself that is being deployed within an organization, alongside that for them to have an understanding of the technology itself. So, how is AI, some level of understanding of how it works under the hood, so that when they see hallucinations, they have an appreciation for why it is happening and how to avoid that from happening in the future. And what we see best success with overall when doing training is to really heavily tie any training to the nuances of the type of work that they do. So rather than super high level Gen AI training that is available, being very tailored in for the work that you do in your day-to-day, here is how you can apply it and here is how you can get very good results.
I think we had some versions of success and failure at that, right? Collectively as a group at Axiom with your help, Peter. When we selected Draft Pilot to help people with red lines, the tool is like on rails, right? Like it has these features, you use them this way. It's very difficult to screw up using the tool, if you will, right? Like you can just take training on it and then you can apply it and you can kind of learn as you go. And then when we figured out the Legora tabular review thing for analysis projects, okay, well, that one, like you need a little bit more enablement, a little bit more setup, and you have to actually know what does it mean to do prompt engineering, or at least how do I write a good prompt? But you can kind of get the hang of it while you're using it and you can see it in real time. And then when we actually did our first pilot where we gave lawyers a chat bot, right? And just said, here's a general assistant that can help you with all kinds of things. We saw wildly different results. Different people pick it up at different levels. And I think you're onto something about having a fundamental understanding of the technology, because I think, some of the use cases that are very sort of on rails, like, you can give those and see efficiencies, and other use cases where you need to be a little bit more creative about how you use the technology, or you need to even think to insert it into your workflow, your results might be very different. So I am a little curious, like, Alex, when you've rolled out Legora, you've tried to get your clients, especially folks at like large firms with huge pools of lawyers that need to like probably adopt slowly in ways, like how do you get people to think differently about the technology and know when they should go to it, when they shouldn't go to it?
Yeah, and that is a tough question actually, because I think it varies a lot. I think Peter's like exactly right. Like education, training is ultra critical, and actually, we've recently had feedback that, interestingly enough, people appreciate some of the very basic generative AI training up front, not a huge amount of it. They like the specificity for what they do, but actually just some of the understanding around what is a hallucination, why is the output not consistently the same, what does that mean for legal work in general, how do we then think about minimizing those types of variations where we don't want it, where are we okay with it? I think that kind of structure, starting why them and narrowing in, seems to be very helpful for clients. It also seems to be something that it is very variable in firms or even within teams or individual practice groups. The familiarity with generative AI and the limitations, the benefits, the capabilities is hugely variable. So some people have an extremely good handle or use it every day in their personal life. Others will maybe have used ChatGPT once, and that's it.
Yeah, and speak around if you think about the pilots and the structured nature that you can have with pilots and great results we've seen with Axiom, by taking a super structured approach for training, you can see great results as well. So one of the clients I work with is Factor, and we've created the SenseMaker Academy, which is effectively a structured training program specifically for legal professionals, targeting both corporate teams and also law firms, and allowing them to get hands-on in a safe environment where there's very targeted use cases with related to the type of work they do on a daily basis, and in a structured workshop environment to actually understand how the technology works, know when hallucinations are most likely to happen, have a sense of how you actually instruct and interact to get a grip on the type of creativity, how to get good results from it. So that type of structured approach for training can be very successful as well. And it's an important thing that people should be mindful of. And as I mentioned, that Gen AI is quite different to traditional technology, and technology adoption is hard at the best of times. And with this new type of technology, we need to be mindful of those hurdles that people face. So structured training can really help.
I need to think a little bit more about that, Peter. I haven't quite adopted enough Gen AI forward thinking in my own doing of my own. Or I was joking with Chris earlier. I was saying like, well, if it was something where I knew I was going to need help and I was going to give it to one of my colleagues to do, and I was willing to give them instructions, that I'm willing to give the Gen AI tool a chance. But other than that, I just do it myself because I'm an old codger. But some of us get in this room live in the future, myself excluded. Let's maybe think about the future for a second. So let's just assume all of the attorneys at Axiom become Gen AI ninjas, and they know how to use all the tools that we've made available for them. Or let's assume that all the attorneys at a large law firm have this kind of technology. What should customers expect in terms of outcomes? Like, is legal work going to get faster and cheaper? Are we just going to figure out how to fill the bucket up with more work since we have time? Generally work tends to expand to fill time. Alex, like, you're obviously actively selling a tool that ostensibly makes legal work either more efficient or better or both. How do you feel about that problem?
Yeah, so this is one that I think every law firm is grappling with right now. Is exactly what is the impact of this going to be on their business? Is it going to change? Is it a huge net positive? Is it neutral? Are there negatives here? And I don't think there's any kind of clear consensus in the market. It's certainly not from what we're seeing. I personally think there is likely to be a scenario where this is win-win or win-win-win. The technology is increasingly adopted. That results in better outcomes for clients around speed, efficiency for certain tasks becomes much higher. Some of the stuff you as Axiom are doing on M&A transactions, for example, that's clearly like a better outcome for clients. But at the same time, I think it can also be a really positive outcome for lawyers and law firms. Like, I think it's going to concentrate their work on the most interesting, high value aspects rather than diluting some of that day and sometimes very long days with work that is less value adding. So I think there's a scenario where it can actually be really positive on sort of both sides of that equation.
I'll share a funny anecdote and then I'll ask a harder question. The funny anecdote, we have an attorney at Axiom who I think is probably one of the most prolific Gen AI proponents and a lawyer that I've ever met. And I recently had an opportunity to ask him, like, hey, we've given you all of the most cutting edge stuff that we can imagine for you to use in your practice. And you figured out how to adopt everything in ways that we don't even necessarily expect. Are you worried the robots are coming for your job? And his honest answer was, oh, no, I'm not worried about that at all. I'm just so happy they do the mundane part of my job I hated doing anyway. So I think that really, it resonates with what you were saying, Alex. On the other side of that argument, we at Axiom have done a lot of large projects for our clients on often the backside of an M&A transaction, right? So, hey, I just inherited a dump truck of supplier agreements. I don't know what's in them. Please figure out which ones I can terminate for convenience and which ones I can't. And for the ones I can't, please tell me the answer to the following 15 random questions that, have to do with my business. Like, do they include the necessary indemnity that I care about? Do they have the insurance levels that I expect? Do they pass down this particular privacy obligation that I have in this country that I do business in that maybe the acquired company didn't do business in? And then on the backside of doing that big complex analysis where we did it the old way, just like everybody, we threw it to lots of people to read all the documents, and yeah, they had some machine learning stuff that made them a little faster, but it couldn't answer the questions for them. And then we'll go do, whatever the necessary remediation project is on the other side. When we put Legora in place to do those analyses now, well, we see a massive reduction in the amount of human capital that is required. We see a big reduction in the cost for the client, and we see an order of magnitude change in the speed. Like, really rough numbers, divide the cost in 2 and divide the time by 10. That sort of kind of thing. Well, if we can get that and we're making that available to our clients today, and if we're winning that business from potentially an entrenched firm who was part of the deal structure originally, who would have by default gotten that business, how does this not mean reduced revenue or cheaper legal services?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's definitely a scenario where it does, or for certain types of work, it does. But I think there is also this view that describes a sort of point in time. Yeah, actually, we're in a dynamic environment and things are going to change very quickly. So with that specific example, when you were doing it mostly manually, you were looking at, 30 data points for every contract. And that was enabling you to get the novations out and the consolidation of suppliers and all this type of thing in a certain way. Now you might say, well, if we just extract the 30 data points, yeah, we can do that in a tenth of the time and we can do it for half the cost, and that's great. But then the next question is, okay, but this is still kind of clunky. We're actually not addressing everything we'd ideally like to address with these suppliers. So now we've got a little more time or we've got a little more budget. Maybe we can squeeze more out of this now. And actually that's going to have benefits downstream for actually how quickly the integration happens, how quickly we realize, additional revenue, additional profits, whatever it is. So I think you'll actually see a change in the way that value is created, because we get this question from from lawyers at law firms quite often, which is, I'm a junior associate. I have a 1,500 a year target. But you're now showing me that 300 of my hours can be done in 50 hours. So I just lost 250 hours and I need to find them somewhere. And it's actually like, yes, but again, this is a point in time analysis. Over time, you actually will probably get more work in, you'll be allocated more deals, it's going to actually change. So I think that's the way to think about it, is actually what is the multi-step sort of second, third, fourth order effect here, rather than just take job X, do it instead with Gen AI, and then see what the difference is. I think there's a sort of change that's going to happen in the way all the things are done.
You're talking about human history and technology evolution, right? I think we all believed that when we had a robot that would cook for us, then no one would ever work again, right? And obviously, that's not the case. Work does generally expand to fill time, and the robots have that ostensibly right now, and they talk, and we're all still working probably more than we ever have. So that does make sense. That's maybe the meta comment. The more tactical comment is, now that we have this capability at Axiom, we're now just applying it in a bunch of different places because the time required to do the work now fits different shapes. And so when previously we could only help clients do this type of analysis on the backside of an M&A when they're already like stuck with all of this and there's all the transaction money available to do the remediation. Now we can suddenly help them in the diligence phase and analyze a whole bunch more documents that they're getting in a deal room that they were never going to have time to look at, and they never knew what the risk was going to be of the potentially acquired business, and now we're helping them do that. I mean, our belief at Axiom is, well, we got to jump on this train because it's not just more opportunity for us, it's more opportunity in general for the entire industry. And every time we find a new way to do something faster, we tend to accidentally figure out new ways to apply it. Like I was mentioning, right now there's these diligence projects. In fact, we've now figured out, oh, this is so fast, we can just help people do CMS, like CMS transition, metadata backloads like in a week. And no one was ever going to think about that project before, and now the technology's made that project possible, and of course people want to do it. Yeah, okay, that makes a ton of sense. Any closing sort of thoughts from the group? We're gonna have to wrap this thing up here. I just invite each of you to maybe, if you'd like, make a final comment.
I think just piggybacking off that last conversation that we had, I've had a number of interactions with our clients saying, this is a new capability. I need it. I want it. Help me. And we're there to help them. But also that kind of eye-opening moment of, I would have said no to the business to that question because we don't have the data, or we don't have the capability, or we don't have the budget to go out to outside counsel to get that. All of a sudden, this technology is letting me ask new questions. It's allowing me to be a better advisor, risk manager to the business. And I think that's just a really interesting change in perspective for all of our clients that are really trying to figure out, how does this now impact my day-to-day? How does it change how I do things? How does it change the risk profile of this acquisition? Or how does it change what could have been a very burdensome CMS upgrade and having to go through all your documents? Like all of a sudden, you can get this information much faster. You can be much more uniform in your application of position or your application of information. I think it's a very exciting moment to be in. And it's also been really fun to see our clients when they realize they can access this type of technology without what I would say is like the corporate overhead of onboarding new technologies. Obviously, clients come to us for that sort of help, but them being able to actually reach through us, get access to this, and then all of a sudden they can see kind of a light at the other end of the tunnel, knowing that they're going to be on their own journey internally for however long. I think that's been a really fun thing for most parts of those conversations. I have seen one person have a internal personal reckoning of what the future of legal work looks like, which maybe is a different podcast. But it's been quite fun in that sense.
Gen AI helps me say yes instead of no, Chris Frickland.
From my perspective, what's been super interesting working with you guys is, and you alluded to it here, you now see that there's certain areas of work you can do that was not possible before, or you can do stuff far faster and at a far lower cost. And Many people in the market may fear that and think, okay, well, what does that mean for how we typically operate? The fact that you are leaning into it and say, like, this is happening, and we know that this is really important, and it rings through from what I heard from speaking with you, working from day one. I'll be like, we know this is important. We want to move fast. We are at the forefront, and this is important to us and our clients. So seeing how you are releasing new technology to the Axiom base, whether it be Draft Quiet or new service offerings that are powered by Legora, it's really impressive and really exciting for me, because frankly, there's a lot of people in the market who talk about different things that can be done, and you guys are doing it, and you're passing on those savings, and you know that this is where the market's going, and it's important to lean in now. So I'd say it's from having been there at the start of the journey to seeing where you are now and where you're going. It's very, very exciting. And it's good that I think it's a good example for others in the market to see what can be done when you take it seriously and you're prepared to make those important decisions and make that change.
And if folks you're saying they should call you to help them out, right up here?
Absolutely.
Alex, you get the last word. Oh, wow. Huge responsibility. So, I mean, I think that my take is actually very close to the sort of end of the conversation, which is I just think there's a lot of reason to be really optimistic around the impact that AI will have, and generally, but also specifically on the legal profession. I don't think there's a scenario where we don't need lawyers anymore. Actually, I think it's probably the opposite. It's probably that lawyers become relatively more valuable even than they have been today. So yeah, huge sort of AI optimist, maybe not surprisingly, but that'll be my perspective.
I've always believed the singularity will never catch us, because by the time it exists, the AI will be embedded in our head and we won't know the difference between ourselves and the AI. But that's a science fiction novel to be written. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks everybody who tuned in to listen, and we'll see you on the next Axiom Legal Tech podcast.